Hey, this is Sandy,
And Randy.
and we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athletic trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase them all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. For this week's episode, we have an interview about all the things to consider when choosing a program.
Yes, and specifically, we will be talking about choosing a grad program in this episode. However, I think a lot of it is also applicable if you are choosing a program even beyond.
Like post-professional.
Yeah, like we do touch a little bit upon how we chose our doctoral program. However, we do go into a lot of like clinical placements and stuff that obviously you won't be. But I think if you kind of apply it to wherever you're applying to, see what I did there? Then I think you can take a lot from this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So for this interview, we have Annaliese Lolla. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Human Environmental Science from the University of Alabama and her Master's of Science in Athletic Training from San Diego State University. Annaliese currently works on Camp Pendleton as an embedded athletic trainer for the 5th Marine Regiment.
So, like we said before, we are talking about how to choose a program, but we also go over some things that students should be asking the program themselves, some things to look into, how to differentiate between the multiple programs, especially if there's a lot around you or if you have a certain career goal in mind. We also talk about financial support near the end, which I think is overlooked. Private school versus public school. We really cover a lot. So if there's anything that you are interested in after this, please don't hesitate to reach out and we will let you know at the end of the episode how to do so. So without further ado, let's hear from Annaliese. Randy, you want to get started?
Absolutely. So no interview is complete without starting with our cryo breakers. So what athletic training tool, and this could be a tape, brace, rehab, anything, describes you as a clinician?
So I've had the same answer for a few years now, and it's Elasticon because I feel like it's really sturdy and reliable on its own. It's a good resource to have, but it's great in a team, and it can provide structure and support to all the other components that it's along with, but also has its own rigidity of its own.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah. I feel like Elasticon is reliable.
I like the aspect of the team part because it's a really good pairing with other things.
I like that. Yeah, you don't usually use Elasticon by itself.
Yeah.
No, but it's good if you need to. Like you
Yes,
can,
it can do
but
it.
you don't normally.
Right? Oh, I really like that.
Yeah.
All right, here another thing we do on AT Corner is we love to pair evidence and experience. So can you help us please kick this episode off with a story about how you chose your grad program?
So my path was really kind of unique in the sense of like what I started with was more of a location. So at the time that I was starting to look at grad programs, my then boyfriend, now husband, was waiting on his active duty orders. And so he was either going one way or another way. It was literally East Coast or West Coast, either that or stay. So for me, I was looking at what programs are on the East Coast, what programs are on the West Coast that might be like close by to him, as well as what programs were I'm most interested, like where did I find my fit? So I looked at programs all across the country, literally C to signing C. Like I looked everywhere. And then from there, I looked at some objective details. So looking at the pass rate, the retention rate, and I kind of went through and narrowed down my programs based on that alone. I found that on the Katie website, and it was just really important to me that I didn't invest my time and energy into an education program that didn't have a good pass rate. So I looked at first time pass rate as well as overall pass rate. And I also looked to see how many athletic trainers were employed in the athletic training setting following their metric. Now that used to be available on the Katie website. I don't know if it still is, but I looked at that because if you graduated a bunch of athletic trainers and then they immediately left the profession that told me probably they didn't enjoy their experience or there was something else going on. So I looked
Mm-hmm.
into that a lot. And then I also looked at the clinical placement sites, the length of time, how long they were there, and then what kind of flexibility and autonomy you had in collecting your emergent sites. So after I racked and stacked all that, I interviewed the program directors. And I
Nice.
really saw the interview of the program directors like me interviewing them as well as them interviewing me. So I would send them a very professional email, say, hey, I'm interested in this. I want to ask some questions. Do you have some time? Some program directors emailed me back and were like, yeah, sure, we can set up a Zoom. Others just answered whatever questions I had like put in the email and were like, let us know if you have anything else. And then I went from there. So I showed up to these interviews professional, but also with questions in mind for them, as well as like thinking of it as an opportunity to kind of sell myself as well. I
Mm-hmm.
assumed that like this was my first impression and you only get one shot at that. So then I interviewed the program director for SDSU, which is my where I went to grad school. And when I met her, her name's Dr. Margaret Greitzer. She's still there, and she did give permission to say that. Um, I interviewed with her, and like it was just very clear that she was so passionate about the program. And so I really took that into consideration along with everything else that was really important to me because I felt that if the program director loved their program and wanted it to be a good thing, then they would invest their energy in the student experience and invest in the program. And at a time when a lot of the MSAT programs were only a year or two old, or you were the first cohort, it was important to me that the program director didn't just lean on tradition because we were growing a new program, and that they really felt like this was a growing, evolving, living program rather than set in its ways. And so her passion really like drove me along with all of the objective measures that I looked at. Like that's why I chose SDSU because it really did rack and stack. And I ended up choosing to go to the West Coast before my fiance husband got his orders. So I packed all our stuff separate and I was like, well, I'm going to the West Coast. I hope you're coming because at the time we were living in Florida. Like truly we packed separate. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
bye. I'm going. I hope you're coming. He ended up coming out here, so it was worth it. But it was definitely one of those things where I would have gone to SDSU either way,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't have looked had I not known that he could probably get stationed out here. So that kind of led me to looking, but it didn't weigh into my final decision after I looked at all of the things that mattered most to me in a program.
Nice. That's awesome. That is definitely a leap of faith.
Yeah, I'm so glad it worked out for you.
I'm glad it worked out for me too.
So you kind of mentioned like the pass rate, retention rate. What other things do you now, knowing what you know, like looking back, what kind of elements do you wish that you looked into before the program, including those concrete things, but also maybe some less concrete things?
You know, uh, because of who I am as a person, I don't think there was anything that I considered that, I don't think I missed anything. I think I
Okay.
weighed things a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, okay. I
the
like that.
concrete things that I looked at were pass rate, retention rate, length of clinical rotation, and research opportunities. So like those were like hard set metrics. I don't think I weighed research opportunities very highly, like whether or not the program had significant research or not, whether or not they were part of a tier one or not. Like, I don't think I really thought about it. I mean, I looked at the faculty and staff and wanted to make sure that somebody was doing research and that maybe I could get involved and that the
Mm-hmm.
university was big enough that at least something was happening, but I didn't really dig into was there any extra support for that? Was there any extra scholarships or anything like that? Fortunately, I ended up being able to get heavily involved and being able to find that support, but I didn't really factor that in so much. And then the bigger things that like I looked at that were less objective was the faculty and staff, program director, whether or not I liked them to start off with, immersion opportunities, the clinical assignment process, and then the order of courses. I will say I didn't really weigh the clinical assignment process super heavily either,
Hmm.
but it ended up being super important for me
Mm.
moving forward.
Could you just maybe kind of expand on that, kind of what you were looking for, or now what you know, what you would like to look for in like that kind of selection process for clinical sites?
Yeah, of course. So with clinical selections, every single program does it differently. And
Hmm.
I found like a very unique program that does the selection based on a combination of the athletic trainer's preference, like the preceptor's preference and the student's preference. So
Hmm.
you do interviews and then you rank them, which is like
Mm.
a super unique thing. And then you get your placements based on what the best pairing was. So like if I interviewed with Sandy and Randy at two separate sites, and like I really liked Sandy, but I didn't feel like Randy really was teaching the way that I wanted, or I could rank Sandy first. And then if you agreed and you felt like I was the right student for you to have in your clinical site, you felt like I was going to fit in well, then they made those pairings based off of that. So that's super unique, but it was really important to me because going into my master's program, because of what my experiences had been prior, I knew who I was and I knew what I wanted to be as a clinician.
Hmm.
I knew what my end goal was. And I really wanted to have that say in my education, have that say in my clinical rotations. So that was important to me. But if you don't know what you want to be in the terms of athletic, like where you see yourself growing, maybe taking that a little out of your hands might be more important to you. But each program does it differently. So some of them will you say, I really want to see football, basketball, and wrestling, and you submit those three sports as your preference. Well, then you might end up with high school football, junior college,
Hmm.
basketball, and wrestling, just somewhere
Hmm.
along the way, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if you wanted D1 football and the only experience you got from your clinical program was high school football, maybe that doesn't translate for you. And so you got to kind of look at, if I know that my end goal is to get to here, maybe I need to choose a program that's going to align with getting me to that end state. And so the program that I chose happened to be really unique in letting us have that amount of autonomy, but you can still weigh it out versus some programs, they just take their roster, they make their pairings, and like, that's what you get. You
Hmm.
don't get a say, you don't get the opportunity for input, which if you truly have a blank slate and know, I want to be an athletic trainer, but I don't know where, that could be great. That could be great. It could give you a lot of diversity of experience, and it takes the pressure off of like being super intrinsic and super like tuned into yourself to really have that opinion of like, this is what's important to me. And
Hmm.
maybe it keeps you from being closed off to other experiences. But it just
Hmm.
depends on, if you have a very set goal, then you might need to find a program that's clinical placements aligned with what your set goal is going to be.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Hmm.
There's a program around us who I constantly have students who, because they have to pick out of the pool of preceptors to interview for their immersion site. So we will get students who reach out to us and they're like, I'm going to interview you. Even if
Yeah.
they aren't looking for immersion, like they just have to interview a
Hmm.
preceptor. And a lot of times it does end up being like, oh, like I'm looking at this for my
Yeah.
immersion. Most of the time it is kind of like leaning towards that. Um, but it's the goal of it is like networking, but also it's really helpful because we do end up talking about like if you were to be an immersion at this site or if you were to be a second year at this site, then here are my expectations of you, here's my
Hmm.
clinical philosophy, here's all this, so then the students can, I don't get to rank them, but they I mean all of them have been really great. I haven't
Yeah.
had any who have been like after
I
the
don't
interview,
know.
I don't know about that. But they do ask about like certain things, and I get to tell them like, hey, in the fall I get to work at 5:30 a.m. So if you want to, if you're not a morning person and if you drive far away, like maybe that's not a good fit for you, and that's something good to know before they like get paired with the site.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something I loved about doing the interview process because it might not be like this is a bad clinical site or like this isn't where I want to be, but it could truly be down to those mechanics of I live really far, I have to work, I, really want this experience, or I don't feel confident in this way. So maybe taking a D1 football isn't the spot for me today, right now, maybe next year. And it also connected me so much to the network. I mean, one of my biggest mentors came out of that interview process. She was never a preceptor of mine. Like, there was never that direct link, but that doesn't change that her and I's personalities matched really well. And so sometimes, just because a preceptor is awesome and a student is awesome, that doesn't necessarily mean that those two personalities will make the greatest pair.
Right.
And so you can have the opportunity to kind of read yourself and read the room and be like, okay, like I really love this clinical sites, sport listing. I'm okay with the schedule, but I don't know if like I super connect with this preceptor. Doesn't mean that they're not a good preceptor, and it just might mean like personality wise, this isn't the best fit. And so you can have the opportunity to make this selection and be like, maybe I'll pick this site because it better aligns with this. But you also have to think about like beginning with the end in mind. So for me, I wanted a very specific experience. I really wanted to get into tactical athletic training. And so with that in mind, like me going to D1 football wasn't necessarily super important because I didn't want to go down that pathway. That wasn't important to me. But I did want well rounded experiences. I wanted to make sure that I saw anything and everything. I wanted to be somewhere where I'd have a lot of clinical autonomy as I grew as a student, which some places there is or isn't that opportunity. It just, again, depends. And it depends on who you are as a student. And so being able to take that ownership of my education and be able to say, like, this is where I stand and this is what's important to me and these are my priorities and this is what I need to experience. I talk to people a lot, and as they go into their second year and they say, well, I want to see a start to finish rehab. I want to see someone get injured all the way to return to play. Great. Maybe a high school setting isn't the perfect place for you then.
Yeah.
Because of that compliance issue. It's not because the high school isn't great. It's that if this is the metric that you need to see before you're certified and really compare it to, if this is what you feel like you need as a clinician before you go stand on the sideline by yourself, maybe take that into consideration as you're looking at your next clinical site, because it might not be the best fit to find a high school if that's your priority.
Kind of along those lines of clinical sites, one aspect of that is that immersion, and that's kind of a big rotation for a lot of athletic training students. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. What kind of like aspects of your immersion site were you kind of looking into for the program, whether it's what did they offer as their immersion or what were their expectations of the immersion?
I definitely looked at both, what was available and what the expectations were. So the first thing that I went through is I looked at what's already established. How do you, like, what relationships already exist? But because I wanted such a niche experience, I needed to know more so what was your willingness to grow? Could I go find my own immersion site? Yes or no, right? When did that fall in the year? So for the program that I went to, our immersion we had one each summer. So it was 4 weeks the first summer, and then it could be as long as you wanted for your second summer, but it always had to fall in your summer. So for me, I was like, okay, what's the limit on this? Like, is there a limit on time? Is there a limit on location? Is there a limit on space? Like, what's the limitation on this? And my program director said, and my clinical coordinator as well, she said, well, it's up to you. Like, find your own adventure. We have these metrics. We need to get a student learning agreement. We need to be able to get these things done. You need to see these amount of things in your clinical experience here across the 2 years. but the sky's the limit for the most part. And so I needed to know that the sky was the limit because nobody really has an immersion site with military already. That doesn't really standard exist.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got a niche one here or there at the Naval Academy or West Point, but that's not active duty military. So I needed the ability to go find a clinician who would take me on as a student and was willing to have me as a military AT, immersion. I was able to find that, but I was only able to find that because my program allowed it. Had my program said, nope, you got to choose from our list, that would have been a significant limitator and it wouldn't have allowed me to get to my dream job, which I have now as having graduated. So it's important that, again, like beginning with that end in mind. Are you going to support me finding and building my own education? That was important to me. On the flip side, they have immersion sites straight through their program. So you can, just do your 4-week immersion site as an attachment to your regular year. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And I really appreciated that option because if I wasn't able to get this military athletic training immersion, then I wanted to stay local. I didn't want to, have to go far,
Mm-hmm.
go across the country for something I wasn't super passionate about or for a placement that wasn't exactly what I hoped for. I would much rather stay local, stay where I needed to be for the full year versus packing up and moving. And that can be really important for people who are considering jobs. If you have to work
Mm-hmm.
through your grad program, then you got to know, like, hey, are we rotating every 4 weeks? Are we rotating every 8 weeks? Are we rotating every 16 weeks? Like, looking at a job schedule, do I have to take an immersion that might be 2 hours from the school? Like, what are those kind of situations so that you can, again, begin with the end in mind and plan ahead and recognize like what your life is going to have to be in grad school. I think every grad program tells you probably shouldn't work through this, but the fact of the matter is a lot of people have to. And so if you're rotating every 8 weeks, that can be really hard on the job schedule. And so that came into play a lot for me when I was looking at my immersion and looking at whether or not there would be a one is what's considered immersion. When does it fall in the academic year? And what's my autonomy in that?
You were talking about flexibility of if you can choose or if they choose for you. And I think you kind of also, usually I don't say this, but you kind of also have to find the middle ground because one extreme where if you get to choose every site versus if they choose every site, like there are issues with both those. But if you kind of have a balance between the two, you will be exposed to new opportunities that
Mm-hmm.
you wasn't even on your radar before. In addition, you can choose like, I want to end up here, this is what I want to do, and this is what I need on my resume before I get there.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think a lot of that comes down to like looking at your clinical sites and looking at your program ahead of time. I a lot of my classmates got to class and then figured out what clinical sites were available. And I think that if you want to take some ownership in your education and you want to have some say, you got to walk in knowing at least what
Mm-hmm.
your options are and what your general process is. And I think a lot of people, especially those that have to work through grad school, they may not look to see like an 8 week versus a 16-week rotation. If you
Mm-hmm.
have 8 week rotations, then you basically figure out your work schedule and adjust to your clinical site, and then you do it again. And thinking about like, is your job going to be flexible enough with that? Are you going to have the support from that? And yeah, there are a lot of on-campus jobs, but they still run on a schedule. So you got to figure how to do that. And it can
Mm-hmm.
definitely be done. Many, many people have done it, but it takes a lot more effort. Whereas if you know that, hey, I'm going to have to work in grad school, if that's a priority for me to
Mm-hmm.
get through the program, then maybe looking for a 16 weeks so you go semester by semester, or a year long rotation so that you can go year by year. And yes, sports seasons change throughout the year, and so you're going to have some adjustments anyway. But if you have the same relationship with a preceptor or a site the whole time, before you leave on Christmas break, you can say, hey, can you give me an idea what the schedule for January is going to be?
Hmm.
Versus if you're rotating every 8 weeks, you basically walk in the door in January and you say, hey, nice to meet you guys. It's super great to be here. I'm excited. Also, what's my schedule for work?
Mm-hmm.
You got to plan that way. And it's an unfortunate reality, and most preceptors completely understand and are supportive of that. But it can still add an extra layer of difficulty if that's something that you need to do through grad school. And so having that in mind, so you can kind of look at the program holistically and see, you know, is this going to be something that is important to me? Do I value the diversity of experiences and having this number of preceptors and this number of clinical sites over having the continuity and the ability to plan my life? And each person has to decide that for themselves. Because even if you're at one site the whole year, you're going to have a very diverse experience because there's different
Mm-hmm.
sports, different seasons. You get in season and out of season. You can, generally a site has multiple preceptors, so maybe you rotate through them. Like, just because you're somewhere for a year doesn't mean you don't have a diverse experience.
Hmm.
But is it more important to you to see a bunch of different clinical sites, or is it more important to you to be able to plan ahead and like have your schedule and have the ability to build those deep, long relationships with your preceptors? If you're somebody who takes a little while to warm up to people, maybe it's more important to you to be there longer. If you don't like being thrown into the fire, maybe a longer rotation is going to be more important so you can feel like you've got your feet under you before you repeat the system. You
Mm-hmm.
just have to weigh out who are you, what's most important to you, and then look at your programs that you're considering and look at them that way. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily base all of your decisions on that, because clinicals are only part of your experience, but they're a pretty significant part. And so you shouldn't show up to your program shocked to find out you
Hmm.
have year-long rotations, or you have 8-week rotations, or
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a single D1 college on your roster, or something like that. Like, you should know that ahead
Mm-hmm.
of time so you can
Hmm.
make an educated decision on what's going to be most important to you.
I have not heard of year-long internships.
Yeah, but to that point though, so I was a bachelor's baby, and our when I was in the program, our first we had 8 week. Your first everything except like your lead or your what would be your immersion now was an 8 week rotation, and our first full year in the program, we spent it at our like institution.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings up a good point that you could still have a diverse, because like technically I was at that institution for a year, but we rotated between the staff. So like I kind of I never thought of it that way, but that is kind of a diverse
Mm-hmm.
like set of rotations because you're with a different clinician even though you're at the same site. Never thought
Mm-hmm.
of it that way. That's interesting.
I think another thing too to look at is the difference between I don't know if you were going to touch on this too, but educators versus clinicians. And some people can be in both of those categories, and some people are more in one category than another. I think it's good to have some people who are, just one category, just one,
Hmm.
but it's also really good to have people who are both.
Yeah. I looked at that when I was looking at like the faculty and staff. I went to my programs page and like, yeah, I interviewed my program director, but I also looked
Mm-hmm.
at what everyone else's experience was, and I wanted there to be a mix. I wanted, someone to have some really heavy clinical experience, or to have
Mm-hmm.
been a recent, primary clinician. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that people aren't clinicians who also teach, and there are
Mm-hmm.
academics who also do clinical in some capacity. But I wanted someone who was a true clinician to add to my experience, to add that like real life experience. When you're sitting in a class and they're telling you, only what came from the textbook, that's super helpful, and you can learn, left, right, and center on lateral limits of what an injury could look like, versus the like true story of, I had an athlete who got into a car accident and tore their PCL that way, and like
Mm-hmm.
this is how they presented. Like, really
Mm-hmm.
getting both sides of the story in my like education standpoint, not just from my preceptors, not just from the whole picture, but like who were my faculty and staff? What were their experiences? What did they bring to the table? And I chose to have a staff that was really diverse. You know, there was someone who was a clinician for 20 years in different settings,
Mm-hmm.
someone who was a clinician for I think over 20 years, but also was a program director for a significant, did both. And we've got
Mm-hmm.
a more research heavy lead. Like those were important to see both the different experiences of academia, but also the different career paths. You know, there were
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
three different doctoral degrees between those three, faculty and staff. And each of them brought something different to the table, a different perspective. You know, why this degree, not that degree? Why
Mm-hmm.
this clinical setting versus that clinical setting? What did I experience? What did I see? How did it go? And different lines of research, not just in that they're necessarily conducting research, but they're subject matter experts on different things. They see it through a different lens, and being able to look at the profession really holistically from these three people who took very different paths, you get to see different elements of it and see a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. How much did you look at the order of classes, or because I know a lot of the classes have to be like they have to have certain ones per Katie, but a lot of places have a different order. Like they might put modalities first, or they might put therapeutic interventions first, or they might have a summer
I was gonna
versus some
say the
some places
summer.
don't have the summer. So how
Yeah.
much did you look at that?
So there's kind of two sides to that. So in terms of true course order, it was really important to me that your interventions course, so your
Mm-hmm.
rehab, your interventions, whichever your program calls it, was taught simultaneously with your diagnostics. I didn't want to know what the problem was and not have a
Mm-hmm.
solution. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
make sense to me. Like, why would I learn the ankle in its totality and be like, okay, I know what this injury is? And then be like, okay, well, here's the injury. I don't have a plan now because I don't have that
Mm-hmm.
information to draw from. So it was really important to me that those were taught simultaneously. Beyond that, it wasn't super important to me how the course is exactly laid out. A lot of programs go lower extremity, upper extremity, and head, neck, and spine, or head, neck, and spine gets added to one of those two.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Wasn't super important to me how that went down. I didn't choose a program that had a modalities class at the time. They've since added it. It wasn't super important to me. I wouldn't say that I weighted that super heavily now, but the summer coursework was really important to me. So when you enroll in grad school, the summer is a trailing year of the academic year. And if you're not considered full time, you may not get funding. And
Mm-hmm.
every summer, there's a different, especially in grad school, like there's a different metric of how many credits, pardon me, and how many credits you need to be taking to be considered full time. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
little magic metric of some kind. I wanted to make sure that I was at least considered that full time because that makes me eligible for financial aid and support. I ended up choosing a program that the second summer you're not, which I had to take into consideration ahead of time. So that meant I
Mm-hmm.
took more student loans for the fall and spring than I needed so that I could cover it in the summer. So
Mhm.
again, planning ahead because I wasn't full time, so I knew I wasn't going to have the funding then. So I needed to pull it ahead of time and manage my money appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at summer courses, it's important to kind of think about where that falls, but also what is the demand and how are your clinicals set. So for us in the summer is our immersions. So
Mhm.
I was like, oh, well, so the second summer when I was in my heavy immersion, it was kind of a good thing that it was part time and not a full time course load, but it was also online. So it was
Mm-hmm.
asynchronous online. So that meant I could be somewhere else, I could be alternatively located, those kinds of things. But in every program, when you look at the curriculum as a whole, how many of those classes are in person? How many of them are
Mhm.
online? How many of them are hybrid? what happens if you get the chance to travel with your team? Like, you're with basketball and they make it to the final four. Like, is that an experience you get to go to, or are you limited by your coursework? Every program has a different policy,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the time it's in favor of the clinical experience, but not always, and you should know
Mm-hmm.
that ahead of time. So when you're really looking at summer courses, course timing and everything, you got to just know what's important to you and really think about, how does this affect my clinical experience, in the sense of, like I said, do I know what to do and do I know what it was, or do I get one then the
Mm-hmm.
other? And how do those kind of interlink together? And does it make sense in your brain when you sit and think about how you want to learn? Does it align
Mm-hmm.
with you? Every program structures it differently, and there's not a right or a wrong way, but you have to know, for you as a student, how do you look at it? How do you view it?
Yeah, kind of similarly, when we were looking into choosing a doctorate program,
Mm-hmm.
we had to look at all the courses, and
Yeah.
because the doctorate is not the doctorate of athletic training specifically is not as regulated, there was a significant difference between uh, one program versus
Yeah.
another and what they teach. So that was something that we were really interested in, and even like looking into like a traditional grad program, there are some places that do different courses, or
Yeah.
like I know a local program near us does like a tactical medicine or like
Mm-hmm.
a response course. Uh, my program did like a casting and bracing, um, where no other programs around at the time I think were
Yeah.
doing that. Some others that I know do like a suturing course.
Mm-hmm.
So that also can be taken into consideration. Also, what else the program offers. So, like one of the places around us um, brings in like rock tape and
Yeah.
mulligan and ART and like hawk grips and kind of like other IASTM tools, um, for an additional price, but you have the opportunity to
Yeah.
take them with your classmates in your course load and stuff like that. So the opportunity that is like set right in front of you is also a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
than, you having to seek it on your
Yeah.
own.
I think that's the one thing, is making it easier to have those experiences than having to be like, oh, well, you're on your own.
Right.
Find it yourself.
Right.
No, definitely.
Did you notice any differences between like state schools or private schools when you were looking?
Yes, I would say I noticed a significant difference, most notably in cost. And also, I felt like the private schools had more, for lack of a better word, like diversity in
Hmm.
the coursework and in the curriculum. So, kind of going into like extra credentials or extra certs that you could get and have added on. Like, I felt like those options were more present in private schools versus state schools.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that comes into the cost, and so
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I did not really heavily prioritize going to private schools. One, wasn't super interested for me personally. Second, being military affiliated, state schools generally have better support than a private institution does. And then
Mm-hmm.
three, when I was looking at the courses around me and what I was looking for, just the pass rates weren't comparable to the state schools in the areas that I was
Hmm.
looking at. I don't think that that's true across all private
Mm-hmm.
schools, but specifically in the pool that I was looking at, there was a significantly better pass rate for the state school versus the private institution.
Interesting.
From this is not to be taken as fact because it is just an observation. What I've seen from having students get into programs over and over for the past couple years,
Mm-hmm.
um, the private schools, because they are more expensive, it seems that they get less or fewer applicants whereas the state schools are a lot more impacted. And I feel that the state schools can be a little choosier with the students, and the private schools kind of get the people who want to be there in addition to the people who weren't able to choose a state school. And so I feel like that does play a role in the type of student who they get, and the deadlines of when the um, when the applications are due,
Mm.
and stuff like that.
But yeah, there's definitely both good students and good clinicians that go to private schools,
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
Right.
But at the same time, like you're right in the terms of like when it gets slid, and because the cost is so much higher, like take my application for example, if I put it into a private school versus I put it into a state school, let's say I have a perfect, somehow a magic perfect application that everyone just loves, and I get an
Mm-hmm.
offer for both. Do I want to pay $30,000 for my education or $6,000?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the private school is probably going to have some additional support, and a lot of times private schools have endowments and additional scholarship opportunities because they are privately funded.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great, but it's not always enough to, you know, make the same cost at a state school.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're in graduate school, in graduate school, there's not Pell Grants. You're much more limited on your FAFSA application, and you're relying on state funding or scholarships or other support, which, like I said, private schools might have more of. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen that in some of my own like experiences. The private school had more money to give me, but it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
as much as they were charging. It didn't
Right.
make the two comparable.
Right.
So it led to me, choosing a state school throughout my undergrad and graduate career.
So that's something that, I talk to students a lot
Yeah.
about, my own personal students, because grad school, I went to a private school for undergrad and
Mm-hmm.
grad. So, this is like I am swimming in student loans. Whereas Randy went to a state school for undergrad and grad, and his undergrad he was able to pay off, and then his grad school, um, he had a GA ship where they paid him to go to school. So it's like we have two
Mm-hmm.
very, very different experiences. The thing that I tell people most is, if you are going, like, you will become a certified athletic trainer at any program that you
Mm-hmm.
choose. You have to decide whether if there are certain like non-negotiables that, like, let's say you really want to have a military
Yeah.
experience, like you have to go to a school that has an
That
opportunity for
opportunity.
that, right? um, if you want to choose to go to a private school versus a state school, if you decide to go to a private school, you have to use those extra opportunities, because otherwise you're paying more for no reason.
Yeah.
So, for example, there were things like, I got an iPad with my education, but I really paid for that iPad, in my
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
tuition. I all like FWADA, CATA, like any all those things paid for, but I I paid for them in my tuition, whereas
Yeah.
other people had to pay their way. Um, like in undergrad and like other like throughout my program, there was free food on campus all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But those are things that like the school pays for. You have to go seek those out. If you're going to go to school and then go home, like, do not go to a private school.
Yeah.
If you are going to take advantage of the extracurriculars, like the Mulligan courses offered,
Yeah.
the ART courses offered, the other like extracurricular things, and the travel experiences and other things, then go to a private school. But if you are just going to go to school and then go home, do
Mm-hmm.
not pay extra to go to private.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely something to consider because you're right. Like a private school does offer so much more in that area. But
Mm-hmm.
you're right. Is it augmenting your education? Are you taking advantage of it?
Right.
especially when you're looking at, you did I get scholarships? Did I get grants? Did I,
Mm-hmm.
what am I actually, bottom line, when it's all said and done, are these two things equal? Yes or no? And a lot of times, like, exactly, a private school is going to be more expensive. You have a lot more available to you, but if you're not
Mm-hmm.
taking advantage of it, then you're paying a higher price tag and not getting the use out of.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
If you were to do it all again, would you end up at the same place?
I definitely would. Yeah, 100%. I loved my graduate experience, not because it was easy. Um, I don't think grad school is meant to be easy, but it challenged me in all the right ways. And I was able to, you know, I've always been someone who was going to school. I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
I never identified as like a college student. Something I'm doing. It's a huge part of my life. It takes a lot of my day
Mm-hmm.
to day. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, I'm not just a person who's in college. Um, I'm a whole human who happens to be going to college, and it really
Mm-hmm.
let me keep those elements of myself and also have the say and the weight in my education, be able to guide my experience, one, to help me grow as a person that I wanted to be, help me grow professionally into the clinician that I wanted to be, and set myself up to enter the field and go into the field, like the little niche that I really wanted. And at the same time, I still felt super supported and challenged in all the best ways. So yeah, I would definitely go back to my grad program without a second thought.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. Because the how I tell the athlete trained students now is like, this is a really big kind of like milestone in your life, and the program that you pick and just you go through has such a huge impact, whether it's bad, good, neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely like you always have some form of connection to the program that you were at. So hopefully it's a case like that where it's like, yes, no, I am very happy with it, and I would definitely do it again.
That's actually a really good point because, like, if you go to your conferences, like whether it's like regional, local, or
Yeah.
national, um, it is important to see like how excited are the alumni to
Hmm.
come back and gather and um, kind of support their program
Yeah.
versus do they not even meet anymore? Do they not
Yeah.
even exist? Like, do they not want to be associated with that program? That's important too, because that's what's going to. Now, I know some people who haven't had a really good experience with their program are like, I don't want to be associated with this program anymore. How big of a deal is it? I feel like it's as big of a deal as you make it. Like, if
Hmm.
you want to go to those things, you can. But really, after the first couple years, people don't regularly ask you what program you went to.
Yeah.
When it does go into like, that's an element that I didn't consider, was like your
Mm-hmm.
alumni network.
Hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know is there one? Is there
Mm-hmm.
one where you are people proud of it? Do people publicize it? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't look at that, didn't think about it, didn't think it would be important. Turns out it's kind of important. It has definitely played a role in my professional life
Hmm.
up to this point. And my professional life has not been too long. And so if it's already becoming relevant, then it's
Mm-hmm.
probably going to continue to be relevant. And when you think about your program, like, are they proud of it? Are they associating with it? Is it on their LinkedIn page, right? Because you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to put all of your education, especially if you were a bachelor's athletic training. If you got your bachelor's somewhere else and then you went to grad school elsewhere, you don't necessarily have to put your grad school if you're not proud of it. You
Hmm.
know, and looking at that and really considering. So yeah, there's definitely, you're exactly right. Like, grad school is a huge part of your experience, and good or bad. And especially as you're entering the profession, if you come out of graduate school burnt out, it doesn't put you on a great first step into the profession,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you went 4 years of undergrad and then 2 years of grad school. So you're 6 years into higher education, and then you step out into the profession for the very first time, already burnt out. It doesn't set you up to really find your footing and find your first steps and, be able to grow and not take the growth as a personal, to feel that imposter syndrome, to feel like you're ready to be here. You enter the profession on a good foot. And I think a lot of that comes down to like, was your program aligned with what your non-negotiables are? I can tell you what mine were, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be what's most important to you as a student,
Right.
to you as you grow as a professional. So making sure that you choose the program that fits with where you see yourself. Again, begin with the end in mind. When you put in your application, do you see yourself 2.5 years from now standing with your certification and your BOC as the clinician that you want to enter the profession as? You're going to grow once you get there, but you got to start where you want to be.
Perfect.
You ready?
Yep. Go for it.
So we like to finish up with an action item, something that someone can take away today. Our action item today is, what is one question every student should ask before choosing a grad program?
I think they should ask themselves when they're looking at a grad program and they're considering it, what are the things that are most important to me? Like, line out what your non-negotiables are and then hold it up to your grad program and see, does that reflect back what you said was important? Or are you picking it because it's your undergrad? Are you picking it because it's convenient? And convenience plays a huge role. Like, moving across the country to start grad school was not fun, but it was what aligned best with what I needed. And so make sure that you're really looking at, if I say this is important, is that in your program? And I would also say, like, take a second and really make sure that you're clear on what you need as a person, as a professional, as a clinician, as a student, and pick something that aligns best with that.
Perfect. I think that's a good one.
I think you said it best.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to close it out too.
Thank you so much for this, Annaliese.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. I really enjoyed it.
During this episode, I mentioned the differences between the resources at different schools. I actually didn't realize this until I was having a conversation with someone about how our school provided athletic training kits. And I didn't realize that was not like readily available. And I mean, it makes sense. Like, you're either paying for it through your school or you pay for it separately. But I think whatever makes more sense for you.
Yeah,
I just like, it was like a light bulb moment for me. I didn't realize the differences.
I think one cool thing about this episode too is, even if you're not thinking of, I mean, obviously if you're certified, right, you're not thinking about a professional program anymore. And even if you're not thinking about post-professional, this is really good for preceptors to hear, right? Because you're going to have observation students, or you're going to have maybe some other athletic training students that might be thinking like, oh, I don't know if this is, like, I don't know how else to get more out of my program, right? This is all stuff that can be very helpful to help kind of guide those students on, like, yeah, maybe you should think about this. Maybe you should look into this.
One of the top questions that I get from our volunteer students is what questions am I supposed to ask a program?
Yeah. So I think this was very helpful in that, to be able to help them. Be like, yeah, you should probably think about asking about this.
Right. So here on AG Corner, we do lots of different types of episodes. This one was an interview episode, but we also do story episodes and education episodes. Story episodes where we bring stories from real life athletic trainers around a highlight topic and share everyone's experiences on the same thing. And we get lots of variety in those, which is the fun part. And then we also have education episodes, which Randy heads, where he reads a bunch of research articles and we then come together and talk about them conversationally, which is awesome and fun, and also good for CEUs if you are our certified athletic trainer.
Yeah.
Which, if you're listening to this and going into a program, keep that in mind for when you become certified.
Yep, that's right.
If you want to hear a little bit more or reach out to us, make sure to email us at atcornereds@gmail.com, and any other contact information such as our Instagram at atcornerpodcast or anything else can be found in the show notes down below. I think that's all I got.
Perfect. Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.